As everyone probably realizes by now, I define Taijiquan completely in terms of its method of relating to other people. It's a very complex and sort of geometric way of relating. It isn't sort of an interpersonal relationship, but it sort of has, let's say, analogous factors that may be compared to that. But it also is something that you can do alone in the solo form. And as I say, the solo form is not definitive of what Taijiquan is. It's important that people understand this, because if they don't, they will agonize too much about which form they want to do and which style and so forth. And realize you could be a complete master of Taijiquan and not do any of the forms that are available today. But that would not mean that you did no form. In other words, I don't think it's possible to master Taijiquan without ingraining some deep behavioral habits that cannot be put into the body and cannot be habituated at any kind of reasonable speed and any kind of relationship with others, that when you have this complexity of your dealing with the other person. So you might say that Taijiquan proceeds in its method by eliminating variables. And you might say at the very end, you have like the least variables, the highest level of practice and skill. You have the fewest variables eliminated, but as you go back through the curriculum, you eliminate more and more variables so that you can focus on things which otherwise you would be too busy keeping track of different things to be able to focus on. And if you can't focus on them, then you can't learn them. So you have to look at the form, the solo form, as an opportunity to focus on certain things under a certain condition in which you've eliminated a lot of variables. Now, one of the variables that you've eliminated is speed. So the form is done very slowly because as you understand more and more about what you're supposed to be doing when you do it, you realize this is not a deliberate slowness. This is certainly not an attempt to move in slow motion or anything like that. It is a slowness born of a certain carefulness about habituating certain things, which simply cannot be learned at a high speed. Now, as I say, Taijiquan is not defined by this in any way, but it's made possible by the things that you learn in the form. Its real definition is from what you do with other people. And in this particular time, we're sort of forbidden. This is the era of the coronavirus, and we're sort of forbidden from doing anything that might pass the kind of virus on to other people. And of course, you can't teach a subject that involves people touching each other and standing face to face all the time without risking that. So at the present, I am, forced to cancel lots and lots of classes and lots of relationships and so forth like this. And people ask me, what can I do? How do I practice? Well, what you have left is the form. And the form is a very, very powerful and useful thing. As I say, just because it is not definitive of Taijiquan, you should not mean that this means it is of lesser importance. As I say, it is so fundamental that you cannot do real Taijiquan without the things that you could learn in the form. Now, this very statement means that your best way of approaching the form is through an understanding of what you need to do these other levels of Taijiquan. In other words, not to approach the form as an end in itself. It's not a performance. In a certain sense, it's not even a health exercise in that sense. It is an opportunity to focus on things which later will become very critical, and you won't be able to learn at the kind of speed that you're doing. All the exercises in the curriculum of Taijiquan increase in speed. The form is the slowest. Tuisho is next, three-step is next, Dalu is next, Sancho is finally at almost full fighting speed. So the idea that Taijiquan is completely characterized by everybody moving in slow motion is really a mistake, and it's a disservice to the art, because it produces a kind of laughable assumption that you can learn everything while doing this. When you do the form, you are not rehearsing movements that you do when you fight. Because to rehearse those movements would mean that you were trying to memorize those shapes and those positions and those exact changes so that then in a fight you could do exactly that. And in fact, that's exactly what you don't want to do. In a fight, and in fact in all the advanced exercises, you're not doing rehearsed positions. You are listening to the other person. So the idea of doing the form so that you can memorize these positions and come back to them later, which is exactly the purpose of forms in other martial arts. I mean, that's why you do the form, so that you can sort of like become completely memorized into the body. So even under the extremes of fighting, you do exactly what you did in class. You do exactly what you did with training. And Tai Chi actually proceeds in a completely different way. It says, no, you're going to do something based on something quite different, not on repeating forms. So then why are you doing them? Why is the solo form based, or seems to be based, in these positions and forms which are so much like Shaolin or karate, or look like they're things that, and in fact, historically they come from this. You've got to understand, Tai Chi was not developed in a vacuum. It was developed in the context of people that did other kinds of martial arts over the years. And so it was a sophistication of this. I was once accused by somebody, he said, well, looks like what you're doing is super Shaolin. Well, I said, well, that's not as much of an insult as you think. And in a certain way, that's what Tai Chi is. It is kind of super Shaolin in the sense that you have very, very Shaolin forms. But the forms have been altered slightly, and those alterations are not alterations to be copied just for the sake of themselves. That is, they do not make the forms stronger in some sort of external way. They're not improvements on the forms. They're reflections of the actual technique that you need to actually do Taijiquan, which, as I say, has nothing to do with executing these positions in a faithful way. So the important thing when you do the form is not that you pick the right form or that you copy those movements of whatever your teacher is perfectly, or that you develop it into a beautiful dance that's very graceful and so forth. No, what's important in the form is that you understand those things that it is intended to develop and that it's supposed to give you the opportunity to develop. Now, I'll just mention a couple of examples. In other words, this is the kind of thing you have to say, well, if I don't know how to focus on these things, there's no point in me doing the form. It isn't just it isn't like a calisthenic. It isn't something you get out of bed and you go like, now I feel much better. I guess you could do this, but you could do anything like that. I mean, it wouldn't make it any better than any kind of, jumping jacks or whatever you would do. And, you can make a whole thing about how it's like relaxation and breathing and all this stuff. Okay, fine, you can do that. But you're missing the real whole point of the form, which is, as I say, it's an opportunity to be savvy about what you will need to know how to do in the future and to focus on your ability to do that. So, for instance, it is a lesson in what I call a somatic condition. There's a sort of sacred rule of Tai Chi, you might say, and that is the somatic condition is the same no matter what you're doing. It's the same for all the exercises. It's the same if you're fighting for your life. It's always the same. It doesn't mean that you spend your whole life in this exact somatic condition. For instance, if you take a ride on a roller coaster, you can say, okay, I'm going to use this roller coaster as a challenge. And whatever happens, no matter how scared I am, I'm going to have the same. Okay, I guess you could do that. But that's not really why you ride roller coasters. You ride roller coasters to, get scared and scream. I mean, so in other words, you don't say this, this white knuckle tension when you're going over the first hill on a roller coaster. That's appropriate to riding on a roller coaster. When you go to sleep, you completely slacken all your muscles and completely let everything go. That's quite appropriate to go to sleep. But that is not the condition that you're in when you do Tai Chi. When it says relax completely, it does not mean relax completely in the way that you relax when you're just lying down in bed. So in other words, it's not to legislate this as the eternal somatic condition for every other thing you ever do in your life. But in your association with Taijiquan, there is only one correct somatic condition. Now, I just mean like how the body feels and how you behave with it. Now, when we move fast, if we want to make big movements fast, and this is something you have to establish for yourself. When you want to make big movements fast, if you want to keep the movement in a shape, like if I want to move my arm like this, and I want to move it very fast, I instinctively stiffen the arm in order to do that. Because if I didn't, it would just kind of flop around like this. It would immediately separate the joints and make all these changes because the pieces of it would separate into separate pieces and have their own sort of Taijis associated with them, their own substantial and insubstantial. So it's completely kind of an insidious habit that whenever we think we're going to make big movements, we just automatically stiffen up a little bit. If you want to move your body very quickly from one spot to the other, you have to stiffen it up to do that. This is a natural reaction. You should understand that in Taiji, we don't do that. It's not a martial art about jumping around or running really fast from one place to the other. There's always one somatic condition, and that condition is not something I can convey to you in 5 minutes in a lecture. This is something that you have to learn through a lot of experience. But it's important to know from the very beginning that it is exactly the same condition for every exercise. In other words, the way you relate to your body, which is really a kind of certain kind of relaxation in which you do not allow blockages to occur. Here's a good example. It's sometimes called swimming in air. When you go in a swimming pool, it's a much thicker medium. And you'll discover that as you move your body much more easily kind of folds in different places like this. And if you want to keep your arm extended, you really have to stiffen it because it's moving against the pressure of the water. And you also notice it has another feature. It creates turbulence. You can see it in the water when you go like this stiffly. On the other hand, when you move like smoothly through the water, then it creates the minimum amount of turbulence. When children want to annoy their parents, they create lots of turbulence. And if you've ever been a child and done this, you realize that to do it, you stiffen your arms. And then it makes lots of turbulence. Well, you could imagine the same feature in the air. When you're moving and you're doing the form, you want to think, I want to move in such a way that it would create a minimum of, if this was water, of this kind of turbulent action in the water. And that is an instinctive kind of release of the joints. So this is a very important clue to the right somatic condition. But you can overdo this relaxation to the point where everything becomes very stagnant. What we're trying to produce in the form is movement everywhere. In other words, it's a mistake to think we might be saying, I'm trying to be as relaxed as possible and still move. By saying that, you might say, well, just think of the minimum muscles that I need to sort of approximate this position, and I let everything else just sort of hang. This is a big mistake too, because what we're trying to do when we do Taiji is we're trying to make a little bit of movement everywhere. There's a saying in Chinese, use a little movement to attract the qi. And this is little in every sense. In other words, big movements do not attract the qi. It's very fine movements. Now, there's another classic that says, first make your movements large, and then make them gradually smaller, and in that way they become fine and delicate. In other words, they become little movements. So in the form, we're making quite big movements. And we want to relax completely so that we have the same condition that if we moved fast, everything would just sort of break up into pieces. So to do this, we have to sort of understand what that feeling is and promote it when we're doing the form. And realize, that's the reason we don't do the form fast. Because as we move faster, we would have to stiffen up the body to preserve these positions. So in other words, the positions are really not really what's important. It's the somatic condition that's important. Now, there's quite a few other conditions in the form that are also important. And I'll try to cover a few more of those in succeeding lectures for this period in which we're all confined to just doing the form.